Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and the latest producer price index figures are out in the United States. What is this and why does it matter? It's the effective inflation for businesses, and it's the biggest monthly jump since March 2022. This is the warning shot about Trump's tariffs. This is Trump-flation on the way. Businesses will not absorb these extra costs if the Trump-flation is sustained. So if Trump doesn't chicken out a bit sharpish, what will be the consequences for America? Just as we're getting to the time of the year when consumerism usually increases. And how will it affect other countries around the world, especially those with strong trade ties with the United States? But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button to stay notified. So the July figures for the US Producer Price Index, or PPI, was 0.9%. That meant that businesses in America, on average, saw their operating costs increase by 0.9% in a single month. Now, if that doesn't sound like a lot, consider it would be double-digit levels of inflation if you saw the same effect every month of the year. This is the biggest jump since March 2022. Now, what was going on in March 2022? Well, a couple of things. First, the hangover from the fiscal stimulus packages which countries around the world, including the United States, implemented to get through the heaviest period of the COVID pandemic. Second, the previous month had seen Russia launch its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, massively disrupting global supply chains of key commodities. But both of these factors were external. The US governments of Trump and then Biden were just reacting to something done to them, not by them. This time it's different. This jump in the PPI is a combination of direct and indirect consequences of Trump's policies. The tariffs most obviously, but also his immigration crackdown. For example, the 0.9%, that's the overall figure across the US economy. But if we hone in, reports in America are quick to point out it's about 40% for fruit and vegetable produce. Now, the United States provides about 85% of its own food. So how did business costs for vegetables jump so high? Well, a lot of migrants work on farms. So what's going to happen if you suddenly crack down on migrant labour in the clumsiest way imaginable? So far, consumers are being shielded from much of this. These figures are for business costs. But businesses focus on profit, and this is going to hit those profits. I mean, who really believes businesses in the fruit and veg sector can absorb 40% increases in costs? No, this is just the earthquake which leads to the tsunami. The tsunami is next. Right now, businesses are waiting to see, those who can afford to do so, are waiting to see if this is sustained. The reason some aren't passing on the costs immediately to customers is not because they're terribly nice. It's because they will then lose customers to competitors who hold on a bit longer. But they can't hold on forever. Back in March 2022, these costs were passed on to consumers eventually because the issue was sustained. Economists believe it will be sustained this time too because the cause is tariffs and immigration crackdowns, and both of these policies look like they're here to stay. Trump is depriving some key industries of cheap labour at the same time as raising the costs of importing materials and components, even for businesses who produce in America. They still need to import materials. Even farmers have to import equipment, chemicals, seeds, and so on sometimes. But although immigration affects some sectors like crop farming and food supply chains, hence why they've taken such a massive hit compared to the average of 0.9%, all businesses are affected by the tariffs. So let's take a look at how. So what exactly are these tariffs? For those who aren't aware, a tariff is a tax on goods you import from other countries. The textbook idea is to make foreign products more expensive, so it encourages people to buy American-made instead, which should, in theory, protect and create jobs there. But what's happening in 2025 is on a different level. The United States has rolled out one of the most aggressive and widespread tariff policies in modern history. The result is that the effective tariff rate, the actual tax being paid on imported goods, has jumped to 18.6% on average, the highest since 1933, right in the middle of the Great Depression. It's a huge shift in how America does business with the rest of the world. Before 2025, the average rate was just over 2%. So this massive increase is sending shockwaves through every supply chain that brings goods to America, including inside America. And those shocks don't just disappear. They travel until they hit their final destination, the price tag you see on the shelf. The overall price level for consumers is projected to rise by 1.8% in the short run because of this. That is on top of the underlying inflation levels. And the hard truth is that this protective wall comes at a cost. And despite what some are trying to say, the cost is not paid by other countries, it's paid by the American companies and people buying the goods. This is where the story gets much bigger than just an extra tax. A policy this huge doesn't just raise the price of one item, it triggers a domino effect of consequences across the entire economy. So let's start where you're going to feel it most directly. So groceries, right? While inflation is already squeezing budgets, these tariffs add in an extra layer of pressure. Food prices are set to rise by about 3%. You'll see it on things like Mexican avocados, Brazilian coffee, European wines. But that chain reaction doesn't stop there. According to analysis from the budget lab at Yale, the new tariffs are causing a massive short-term price surge for clothing and footwear. They estimate that prices for clothes could jump by 37%, leather products like shoes, things, 39%. Even after that initial shock, prices are expected to stay about 18 to 19% higher for good. And you think about what that means. So a pair of shoes that used to cost $100 will now cost $139. A new jacket, a new car, the parts to fix your current one, all connected. Automakers are forecasting billions in additional costs due to tariffs, a cost that then has to get passed on to the car buyer. That brings us to the most critical link in the chain, the one that directly threatens Americans' financial security, their jobs. The stated goal of tariffs is to protect American manufacturing, but the 2025 data points a very different picture. Research shows that any small job gains from the protective effects of tariffs are more than wiped out by losses across the rest of the manufacturing sector. This is literally what's happened when it's been done in the past. So how does that happen? Well, there's two big reasons. First, many American factories depend on imported parts to build their products. So they're building the products in America, but they still have to import things. Tariffs make those parts more expensive, which drives up production costs for US companies, makes them less competitive. Think about this just in terms of the auto market, because we saw some of this in 2022, certainly in Britain, probably in other countries as well. So what happens? The price of a new car jumps up. So it becomes much more expensive. What do? You think to yourself, well, do I really need a new car? Maybe not. So you're more inclined to want a second-hand car. But there's only a limited supply of second-hand cars, right? So you've increased the demand for second-hand cars. So the price of a second-hand car increases, which is exactly what happened a few years ago, which means those on very low budgets now are priced out of the car market, which might mean if their car's knackered, they need another one, but they can't find a cheap second-hand car. Then their job-seeking opportunities are limited because their range is now limited. So you hit the labour supply market there. The people buying the second-hand cars now are now spending more on second-hand cars than would otherwise need to do. And there are fewer people buying the new cars, which means you're not making as many new cars because not many people to buy them. So jobs get lost from the car making industry, even those making cars inside the United States. Then there's the second issue, retaliation. So when the United States imposes tariffs, other countries can hit back with tariffs of their own. Now, although many countries have not retaliated, some have, and those who have are amongst America's top trading partners like Canada and China. That has been devastating for sectors like agriculture that sell their products overseas. The end result is a drag on the entire job market. Economic models are projecting that these policies are going to lead to over 500,000 fewer jobs just by the end of this year. Jobs growth has already dropped well below initial expectations, which prompted Trump to fire the lead statistician and attempt to appoint someone who will fiddle the figures for him. But fiddle figures will not do much to change the reality on the ground. It actually, if anything, could make it worse if investors don't trust the data. The unemployment rate is going to rise. Key industrial states are facing tough times. When you pull the lens back even further, you then see the impact on the overall US economy. The budget lab at Yale again projects that US real GDP growth will be reduced by 0.5 percentage points in both 2025 and 2026. In the long run, they expect the economy to be permanently smaller by about 0.4% every year. Which, to bring this back to Britain, is, remember, only a tenth of Brexit. Brexit hits our GDP by 4%. So Brexit is officially 10 times dumber than Trump. But 0.4% might sound small, but that's like making $125 billion worth of economic activity just vanish year after year. So what's the bottom line cost? So when economists have added up all the price hikes, the 2025 tariffs are set to cost the average US household an extra $2.4 thousand this year alone. And that burden isn't shared equally, I'm sure you'll be surprised to hear. These tariffs are regressive. They're a regressive tax, which means they hit lower income families the hardest. There was analysis showing that for the lowest earning households, it would be a loss of about $1,300 a year in purchasing power, which of course is below the average, but for a very low income household is a much higher percentage of their income. So these families spend a much bigger chunk of their income on essentials like food, clothing and transportation, which are the things that are seeing the biggest price hikes. For these families, a 37% price increase on clothes, that's not inconvenient, that's a crisis. As for a 40% jump on, say, fruit and veg, if that gets passed on, that's going to lead to nutritional problems for growing children. That causes long-term damage to America's next generation of workers. Economists are concerned by these latest figures. Republicans seem not to be, but they should be terrified. First, these 2025 tariffs are, for all practical purposes, a massive hidden tax on Americans. And the more these tariffs impact people's lives, the more it's going to be reported. And the more it's going to be reported, the more likely it's going to be reported that this is a tax on Americans. Can the Republicans really be seen as the people who cut taxes for the rich whilst raising them for ordinary voters? Second, the impact is a chain reaction that starts with higher prices on things like clothes and food, but quickly leads to a slowdown in the US job market and broader economy. You need food and clothes, right? People have to prioritise those. So therefore, they will stop buying things that aren't as high priority. So those industries suffer. So jobs, so you could, in theory, have a factory that doesn't have to import anything, so it doesn't care about the tariffs, right? It produces its things from American-sourced raw materials and from other American factories that produce the parts from those raw materials. No global supply chain at all for them. And yet they'll still suffer because if their product isn't absolutely essential, Americans won't buy it in as great numbers because they're having to work out how they pay for the much more expensive food and clothes. So jobs start to be lost everywhere. Unemployment goes up everywhere. Welfare spending gets stretched. And third, the cost is very real and very significant. It's draining an average of $2.4 thousand from every household in America, with the heaviest burden falling on those who can least afford it. This is a shit sandwich prepared not by a foreign war or a foreign pandemic, but by the US president acting against all the expert advice. And it's a shit sandwich we're all going to have to share. When Americans suddenly have much less money to spend, they won't be able to afford to buy as much, whether American-made products or imports. And that slows global trade down. All because of the stupidity of one man. And also, ironically, because a nation wanted cheaper food. In fact, for my final point, I'm going to say this. I cannot for the life of me understand why I've seen a few US reports on this, news reports, right, on these PPI figures. And I thought, why didn't any of them, much less every one of them, why didn't they start off by going, oh, do you want to see how much eggs and fuel have gone up? Because those were the two key commodities during the election, weren't they? Let me just look up a few things. In July, the wholesale price of eggs shot up by 7.3%. 7.3% more expensive in just 1 month. It had already been going up before then. For gasoline, it was 2.8%. So well done, dumbasses. You voted to flush your country down the toilet. And you know what? Eggs and gas got way more expensive into the bargain. But let me know what you think in the comments below. And for more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching. And until next time, I'll see you later.